Whether you're in Dawn or up at the Wall, Casterly Rock or the Dothraki Sea, the politics, culture and economics of the world created by George R.R. Martin varies greatly from region to region. The same is true of the legal traditions across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond, and that is what we are going to be looking at today, with the help of some famous legal theorists. Before we start though, there are obviously going to be spoilers coming up, so if you're not up to date, go and do your homework. We begin our journey in the north. The Starks were the main focus of Season 1 and offered our first opportunity to see justice in action in the surrounds of Winterfell. Early on, Ned Stark beheads a man who has deserted the Night's Watch, and this already tells us a lot about what the North values in its legal system. On the one hand, we can see that there is clearly no issue with the death penalty in Westeros, although it might be argued that Ned may come to regret that fact. The other thing that we can take from this, however, is that loyalty and keeping one's word are both of great importance to the Northerners. In the same way that his father beheaded a deserter, Robb Stark beheads Lord Karstark for treason, and so the suggestion is that the concepts are actually a central ideological feature of the Northern House's mindset. If we were to think about a legally binding contract, it is essentially exchanging one thing for another. I exchange money for goods and services, etc. A lot of this is based on those core Starkian principles of loyalty and keeping one's word, because when someone agrees to fix my roof, for example, I have to place a certain amount of trust in them that they will actually do it. This also applies on a much grander scale across the whole northern region through something called the social contract, a legal and political theory that dates back to Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The idea here is that instead of exchanging money or goods and services, an individual exchanges some of their freedom for protection by the government. This might sound a little odd, but it is something that is still relevant today. We're all protected by a police force, but in exchange for this we have to pay taxes, and if we break the law, we are liable to be locked up. The same principle applies in the north, where the leaders of the various houses give up some of their freedom by pledging their swords to Winterfell, and in return their lands are protected and assistance is provided in times of need. The Lannisters also have a focus on contracts, but there is a little bit more of a sinister side to this for them. When they say that a Lannister always pays his debts, this means on the one hand that if you do them a good turn you will be rewarded, but on the other hand if you cross the Lannisters then you will surely regret it. This all feeds into the fact that the Lannisters are arguably the best house at playing politics, whether that's Tywin as the original puppet master, or Tyrion and Cersei who are following in their father's footsteps. The family stops at nothing to plonk their bums on the Iron Throne, and from a legal point of view this creates something of a contradiction in the way that they operate. There is not, as far as we know, a written constitution for Westeros, but that doesn't mean one doesn't exist at all. To the extent that there is an unwritten constitution, there is a king, or now possibly a queen, based in King's Landing who acts as the overall sovereign, but then there are the Seven Kingdoms and the Iron Islands who all pledge fealty to the sovereign. Well, that's the theory at least. The Lannisters always seek to enforce this constitution, and even when Robert Baratheon was on the Iron Throne, their solution was not to deny his authority, but rather to bump him off so that Joffrey quote-unquote Baratheon could take his place as the sovereign. All of this links to a legal theory put forward by Hans Kelsen, who describes the law in terms of a series of norms, i.e. you must do this or you must do that. Kelsen wanted to find out what the basis for any legal system is, and so developed the idea of a Grundnorm, the foundational norm where all of the other norms come from. To understand what the Grundnorm is in Westeros, we can imagine a conversation between a mother and a naughty child who has been stealing food from the market in Flea Bottom. "Stop stealing! Why should I?" "Because the soldiers will catch you." "Who put the soldiers in charge?" "The king did." Why does anyone care about what the king says?" "Because the king is the king." You can see at this point that we reach something of an impasse in the argument, and there isn't really anywhere left to go in the argument at all. Therefore we can all of a sudden comprehend why the Iron Throne is such a central feature, and even why Game of Thrones is such an iconic title for the programme. The throne is the grundnorm of the Westerosi legal system. In one sense this is hugely important, as it provides a single point of stability within a legal system. We see this in Season 7 when Cersei meets with the Iron Bank of Braavos and contrasts herself as a monarch with Daenerys Targaryen as a revolutionary. The implication is that the interests of the bank are best served by the stability of the Iron Throne. However, this stability alone is not really enough. After all, what would happen if everyone suddenly decided to ignore the sovereign? Kelson did account for this, but the theory is best expressed by Jeremy Bentham and John Austin. They argue that the laws are ultimately a series of commands, and if a ruler is powerful enough, then they should be obeyed. This is a relatively simple idea, but it is one that we see so much in the tumultuous world of Game of Thrones. All of the politicking and backstabbing is important, but any contender for the throne does have to show their strength as well. On that front, not much compares to blowing the Sept of Baelor to Kingdom Come in a blaze of wildfire. Overall, it is quite easy to see why the Lannisters have been so successful in Game of Thrones. Not only do they work the corridors of power effectively to put people where they want them, but they are also unafraid to assert their dominance when it is necessary to do so. The words of House Targaryen are fire and blood, and although Daenerys has done a lot to live up to that motto, the legal theory that dominates her story arc is quite different. Natural law is the idea that there is an underlying morality to the law that should ultimately govern the way that any legal system operates, and the rights that people have. I'm not sure that Daenerys has a complete ethical code, but there are certain rules that she abides by. It would, for example, have been very easy at points to simply allow slavery to continue as a practice, as this would have saved a lot of trouble on the other side of the Narrow Sea. The reason that she did not do this, however, was not for political reasons, but because she had a fundamental belief that slavery is wrong. The same process applies to her decision to not go for a full-on dragon assault on King's Landing, as she knows that a lot of innocent people will die. Even in her personal relationships, like with Jorah and Varys, there are certain hard and fast rules that are always followed by Daenerys Targaryen. Before we finish, I do want to give a special mention to the legal philosophy of the wildlings, specifically before they moved south of the Wall. This might seem surprising as they don't appear to have a legal philosophy, but that is kind of the point. They voluntarily enter into their own societies where they can do what they choose, and so the only reason they follow Mance Rayder into battle is because they themselves have decided to do so. To the extent that there is a legal system, it is not coercive in the same way that the social contract is. Free folk does feel like the appropriate term for these people. So that completes our trip around the Game of Thrones universe using the perspective of some of the most famous legal philosophies. Which legal system do you think is the best? Make sure to leave a comment below. Also, if you did enjoy this video, then make sure to leave it a like and subscribe for more lore videos in the future. That's all from me. Bye!